students, welcome to muscle contraction part 2 video. In this we are going to take the sliding filament theory or the cross bridge theory. So let's begin with the mechanism. Mechanism of muscle contraction. It can be explained by sliding filament theory. What does this theory states? According to this theory, what happens? Thin filament slide over thick filament, and this sliding causes contraction of a muscle fiber. According to this sliding theory, cross bridges are formed. So if contraction has to happen, what will happen? Actin filament will slide inward on the myosin filament. So actin is the thin filament, it will slide inward on the myosin filament, that is the thick filament of a band, with the help of cross bridges. So cross bridge will be formed in order to reduce the length of the sarcomere. Once the cross bridge is formed, the length of the sarcomere will reduce, and which in turn will cause the contraction of the muscle. You can see cross bridges here. Here we can see cross bridges are formed. These actin filaments and myosin filaments are forming a bridge, and they will in turn move. These thick filaments will move thin filaments over them. The thin filaments will slide over the thick filaments, and this bridge will cause shrinking of or shortening of sarcomere, which will cause the muscle contraction. We can see with the video here, we are going to see the cross bridge cycle. The functional unit of contraction is called sarcomere. So inside the sarcomere, all the process will begin. The sarcomere will shorten. When it will shorten? When myosin heads, that is the thick head, it will form a cross bridge. The myosin head of the thick myofilament will form a cross bridge with the thin filament. The formation of cross bridge is initiated when a calcium ion you can see is coming, it is released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it will bind to troponin. Troponin is here. This binding causes troponin to change shape. So the shape of the troponin will change, and tropomyosin. Now what will happen? Tropomyosin will move away from the myosin binding site. The myosin head must be activated before a cross bridge cycle can begin. So it has to be activated. This will occur when ATP will bind to the myosin head. And what will it do? It will be hydrolyzed to ADP and inorganic phosphate. Now the energy will be liberated from the hydrolysis of this ATP. This will activate the myosin head, and the myosin head will come into cock position. Now the cross bridge cycle is having 4 steps. First one is the cross bridge formation. Under this, activation of myosin head will happen, which will bind to actin, and this will form a cross bridge. Inorganic phosphate is released, and it will bind between actin, and myosin will become stronger. Step 2 is the power stroke. ATP is released, and what will happen? Myosin head will slide the thin filament towards the center. Step 3 is cross bridge detachment. Another ATP will bind to the myosin head, and the link will weaken. The link between actin and myosin will weaken. Step 4 is the reactivation of myosin head. ATP is hydrolyzed to ATP and inorganic phosphate. Now, the energy released during hydrolysis reactivates the myosin head, and it will return it to the cocked position. As long as this binding site of actin remain exposed, the cross bridge cycle will repeat, and the cycle repeats. In turn, it will cause the thin filaments to pull towards each other, and the sarcomere will shorten. You can see the thin filaments will be pulled towards each other. This shortening, you can see shortening is happening here. This shortening of the whole muscle will cause the muscle to contract. So the cross bridge cycle will keep on continuing till calcium ions are actively transported back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and the troponin returns to its original shape, allowing tropomyosin to glide over and cover the myosin binding site on actin. So this was all about muscle contraction. We have seen how a muscle contracts. If you have any questions, then write us on discussion board at askIITians.com. There you can post your queries where experts will answer your questions. Well students, this was all about muscle contraction. We have discussed in first video a muscle fiber and muscle proteins. In our second video, we have discussed the mechanism of muscle contraction, also known as sliding filament theory or cross bridge cycle. So this was all about this topic. Hope you have understood. In our next videos, we will discuss immune system and menstrual cycle. Stay tuned.